Let the scriptures speak for themselves.
All right, well, we are live, and James, I just want to thank you again publicly for taking the time out of your day to talk with me, some random guy, about the ending of Mark, and I'm excited for this conversation. And to start us off, I just wanted to hear a little bit about your background and how you came to, really, as much as you've studied this, which we'll talk about in this video, I'd love to hear like what sparked your interest and what got you to delve so deep. You've written an entire book on this topic, along with the woman caught in adultery passage. You may have more books that I'm unaware of, but you've definitely delved extremely deeply in this topic. I found your research very helpful in my study on this, and I just love to hear, maybe people watching would love to hear like what got you interested and led you to ultimately writing your book.
Well, I began studying the field of New Testament textual criticism in 1986. My first close encounter was with a book that was in a book sale. Christoph Lake's The Text of the New Testament, one of the later editions of it, and that got me investigating the field in general. And but oftentimes when people look into text critical questions, they ask, well, what about the larger ones? There are very many smaller textual variants and textual contests to consider, but oftentimes it's the story of the woman caught in adultery in John, and the last 12 verses of the Gospel of Mark that often people ask about. Well, that's a rather large thing to decide upon, and many people are not well equipped. Lots of even commentators have been somewhat misled by just things that got passed along in the field. Comments by Bruce Metzger that told part of the story but missed important details of the evidence as well. And so I came to the topic of Mark 16:9-20 in particular. I wanted to hold off until I thought that I'd gathered enough of views to say, well, I'm well read on the subject. And beginning in 2007, I began to write on the subject. And right now, my book is on Amazon. It's 99 cents, and I think does a fairly good job. Not entirely, but it focuses on a lot of the misinformation about this passage that is still circulating in commentaries, even in some very well-respected commentaries. James Edwards still is passing along mistakes that have been handed down in the field. So part of the challenge is correcting misinterpretations, but also just misinformation that is still being circulated even among some of the best commentators in the field are still using outdated or simply inaccurate information.
Yeah, no, I think that's so right. And I pulled up your slide where you quote the Message in Jerusalem Bible and the ESV. And for me, your book, James, I think what stands out, what you contribute to this debate so well, is that there's a lot of misinformation. And I really see you as like a whistleblower, if you will, of pointing out. Your introduction to your book was very helpful. And I was quite frankly baffled at how bad some of these truth claims were. I remember the one that stood out was that there wasn't a single shred of evidence for the longer ending of Mark until the medieval times. And I remember reading that from someone who has 2 graduate degrees at Southwestern, and I just thought, this is wild. This is crazy how far that this bad research. And as you point out in the introduction as well, we see this in footnotes through various translations of the Bible, and it's very one-sided and skewed. And once I got to reading a bunch of books on this topic, including your book, I found out just how skewed this really is, and has been quite shocking to me that, say most manuscripts don't have this, or, some of those claims just have stood out to me. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe your role as a whistleblower for this issue. And then I'd also love to hear what it was like for you stumbling across how twisted and construed this thing has been as you started studying it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, one of the books of a previous generation is the last 12 verses of Mark, vindicated by Dean John Burgeon back in the 1870s. And
Okay.
in his book, he quoted several commentators of his day who were getting things wrong, sometimes horribly wrong,
Mm.
making multiple references to one composition as if it was two compositions by two different writers. And Burgeon corrected a lot of things. Not that it did a lot of good, because 100 years later, the United Bible Society's textual apparatus was still making mistakes. That if they had just paid a little bit of attention to Burgeon, he had the information, the data right before their eyes to say, no, that's not from this author, that's from this author. But 100 years goes by, and Burgen's comments are still being ignored. I think now by the fifth edition, they finally did correct some things. But the first edition came out that had mistakes in it that Burgen had already corrected.
Mm.
But I think that was part of people thinking, well, that Burgen, he was just a fundamentalist radical. He was Bergen, so we'll just set him aside.
Mm.
Well, again, that's something to watch out for. When you send the message that the house is on fire, don't send the clown to tell the story. And so some people will say, well, these people are just clowning around out there with these corrections. We can afford to ignore them. But
Mm.
it's important to establish, the guardrails against appearing to be just some obsolete fundamentalist or some kind of friends that's being represented. So I should probably emphasize from the beginning: I'm not a King James onlyist. I'm not majority text only. I'm not TR only. So folks need to clear themselves of some assumptions that they make, and look at the evidence. I think sometimes when you see in Bible footnotes, and it just says things like, oh, the earliest manuscripts and some other witnesses don't include Mark 16:9-20. And that's as far as they go with it, and think, well, see, it's already been settled by the experts. We can ignore this passage. Or as
Yeah.
I think James White would say, well, it's questioned, and therefore we shouldn't use it like we normally use the Bible. Like the Bible, we know why the Bible was given to us, but since we have doubts about the textual foundations of this passage, we'll just not really treat it like it's the Bible,
Yeah.
because the Bible is something we usually use to establish doctrine and so forth. But if you're always putting this in doubt, then you won't use it that way.
Sure. And I think that's the case, in our day and age. I'd really never heard, other than growing up and seeing it in my Bible in brackets and with a very childlike, naive view. I thought, okay, well, it's in there, it's God's word. And then going to Bible college, we really didn't cover the issue, other than my New Testament professor. I remember him saying that, this isn't canonical. Most people reject it, along with the woman caught in adultery. And that's the predominant view, and I have held that until I came across this passage. I've taught through most of Mark on my YouTube channel, and I got to this passage, and I knew it was a big deal, and I needed to spend a lot of time studying. And once I got to researching, I found that my presumptions were pretty wrong, and the evidence for this is actually stacks pretty tall, and so I was quite surprised by that.